It's a real honor for me today. It's a real honor for me today to be able to facilitate some conversation with our four guests. And we're fortunate this morning to have four individuals who come from varied and unique life experiences. But what they do all have in common is a deep and persistent commitment to seeing justice and liberation for the Palestinian people. So the first person I'd like to introduce a bit more is Joshua Vis. Joshua is a speaker, writer, activist, and filmmaker. He holds a PhD in Old Testament and Hebrew Bible from the Duke University, as well as a Master of Arts from the University of Chicago Divinity School. He leads immersion tours of Israel and Palestine with the aim of teaching participants about the history, the archaeology, and the interpretive history of the Bible, along with the realities of the Israeli occupation of East Jerusalem, the West Bank, and Gaza. The Law and the Prophet is Josh's first film, and I think we're all hoping it won't be his last. So welcome this morning, Joshua. The second person I'd like to introduce is Sam Bahour. Sam is a Palestinian American born and raised in Youngstown, Ohio. He returned to Palestine with great hopes around the time when the Oslo process began in the mid-1990s. He now lives in Aberle or Ramallah, Palestine. He's a managing partner of Applied Information Management, a consulting firm specializing in business development with a focus on startups and the information technology sector. As a Palestinian businessman, Sam has experienced firsthand the paralyzing and oppressive nature of the Israeli occupation, both in his work life and his home life. He serves in various capacities in several community organizations, including co-founder and board chair of Americans for a Vibrant Palestinian Economy. He writes frequently on Palestinian affairs and has been widely published in leading outlets. He is co-editor of Homeland, Oral History of Palestine and Palestinians. Welcome, Sam. And I just want to add that it's 8:00 p.m. Saturday evening. So thank you, Sam, for being with us today. Stephen Aberle is a performer, programmer, parent, and grandparent. He lives, works, and plays as an uninvited guest on the unceded ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples in what is colonial known as Vancouver. He's an active member of Independent Jewish Voices Canada, and he's been organizing in the struggle for Palestinian liberation for 30 years. Welcome, Stephen. And Dan Epp-Tiessen is retired or trying to retire from 25 years of teaching Bible and many other topics at Canadian Mennonite University in Winnipeg. He has a long-standing interest in the history and politics of Palestine, especially the origins of Zionism and its impact on the region. As a Christian, he's particularly distressed by Christian Zionism, by the way it interprets the Bible, by the way it encourages Christians to uncritically support the state of Israel and its actions, by the way it encourages racist ignoring of the Palestinians, and by the way it drums up Western military, financial, and diplomatic support for Israel. Attending the All Out for Palestine rallies held in Winnipeg each Saturday since mid-October has become a regular part of his schedule. And so thank you, Dan. And I know you're missing the rally today because it happens at noon. So I'm grateful that you chose to spend the time with us. So those are the four folks. And as some of you may know, we held 3 screenings in the Okanagan of the Law and the Prophets. And out of that, we generated questions. And I thank all of you who sent in questions when you registered. We won't be able to get to all the questions today, but we tried to pull the key themes that emerged and generate some questions. So Joshua, I think we'll start with you this morning. And the first question we'd like to learn a little bit or hear from you about is how did this film come to be made? And why did you choose to focus on the particular aspects of the occupation that you did? Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you to everybody who's helped make this happen, to everybody who took the time to watch my film. I'm super grateful. I also want to mention my partner in this film was Eric Sprotenboer. He's not here, but without him, it wouldn't have been possible either. But mainly, it wouldn't have been possible without the figures who are prominent in the film. And what happened to me is probably something that happens to lots of people who end up working in this area, is that you start meeting people who are doing this work on the ground, Israelis and Palestinians, and you do that in a variety of ways. People will recommend them to you. Some of them I sort of sought out myself. Sam, I met because I did a tour in 2017 and somebody suggested we go to Ramallah, and I'd heard about Sam before, and we did. And once I heard him once, I knew he was going to be a part of every tour I did from then on out. And that was a lot of how it happened, really quite organically, that I came into contact with all the different individuals in the film who are featured. And over time, and I sort of gathered then over time, 2016 was when I started doing this work. And then we filmed in March of 2020 and ended up having to leave early because the pandemic hit. So we were filming in this crazy time in which this global pandemic was just starting. So I had these wonderful people with, I think, super important stories and information about all the really technical and often invisible ways that Israel has come to control and oppress Palestinians, specifically in the West Bank, in this film, West Bank and East Jerusalem. People were, when I brought people there, they were always surprised, but very moved by the speakers that I would introduce them to. And so I wanted to try to amplify their stories in a creative way. And there was some money in my denomination earmarked for Israel Palestine. I asked if I could use it to hire a film crew and go there and film these various cast of characters, and they said yes. And so I did, without really, we hadn't like storyboarded this or anything. If you're familiar with that language, I just said, let's get there. Let's set up, let's do these interviews. I know these people have wonderful information to share. And then after we have everything, let's figure out how we might put it together. And that's what Eric and I did, which was a fun but complicated process, as you can imagine. I mean, Sam and I sat down for probably an hour, hour and a half. That's how much material I had from Sam and from everybody. And then it was like, how do we condense what is 15 hours of interviews into a 2-hour or less than 2 hours? That was always our goal, and we just barely got under that film. And how do we do it in a way that gives people enough history without overwhelming them with history? How do we arrange it? Those are all things we had to figure out sort of after the fact. What, for example, what illustrations do we need to have in here? What graphics do we need to have so that these things that people are explaining can become more understandable for, in our case, we were trying to make it such that somebody who knew basically nothing, they would be quite overwhelmed with tons of information in that 2 hours, no doubt. But if they were carefully sort of watching, I don't think somebody who comes with zero knowledge gets totally lost. Surely they have all kinds of questions, but my hope was that somebody with no idea could watch it and feel like they could follow it and learn some things. So that was a choice we made. I mean, we could have made it up a level, right? Assume more knowledge, but we thought, well, then we're limiting our audience, and we didn't want to do that. And I already forgot the other question. Was it about the title?
Yeah, and yes.
Okay.
How did you choose your title, and why did you use the word prophet? Some people were curious about that.
Yeah, we kicked around some ideas. A popular one that almost made it was like the Peacemakers. But it wasn't, that to me was not, I don't know, it didn't hit the way I wanted it to. But I did want in the title to honor these people and what they do. Often quietly, not a big audience, not stars around the world, known for their activism. I mean, known by many, but not known by most. And so I wanted the title to, and I wanted the film to honor them and the sacrifices they've made for peace and justice. So I wanted them in the title. And if you look at my background, right, my educational background, my mind sometimes does think in biblical terms. Less and less so now because I'm becoming fairly disillusioned on that front. That's a whole nother conversation. But the Law and the Prophets just felt to me like it resonated with so many different things that are happening there. Obviously, the Law and the Prophets was an early way that the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible or the Tanakh, the label it was given early on before it was all canonized, was the Law and the Prophets, and then the writings were eventually added. Jesus mentions the Law and the Prophets in the Sermon on the Mount, talking about justice, and that's really what the Law and the Prophets are about. And then, of course, you have all the questions about international law that's at play here. What's the fate of international law in this place? And then I see these folks as contemporary prophets, and I don't mean that in a religious sense. I mean, the religious observance of the people in this film varies dramatically, right? But I think the word can have secular meaning as well. And so I intended in that way, people who are fighting and making big sacrifices and often working in obscurity. I think these are prophets.
Thank you, Joshua. And for me, as I was reading and thinking a bit more about your use of the word prophet, to me, a prophet is always someone that calls the people, in this case, the international community, around what they're avoiding and not taking notice and standing up for. So I thought your use was a really good use in terms of both biblically and secularly. So thank you. Sam, I'm going to turn the next question over to you. And I'll just start with this one. You live in the reality of the occupation on a daily basis. There's probably no aspect of this film that you have not personally experienced or seen people in your community experience. How do you feel about the way that the film covered these issues? And is there one aspect that you want to talk to us a bit more about in terms of the occupation? So thanks, Sal.
Sure. I can answer that in about 4 hours, but I'll try to do it in a couple minutes. First, hello, everyone. Great to have you here. Thanks for coming out. True that we know most of what was in the film, but I would caution anyone to think that only because we're living under occupation that we have a full picture of what's happening under occupation. The Israelis have been successful over decades, and this is pre-Oslo, of fragmenting our community. And it has been so fragmented that me living in Ramallah have very little information of what goes on in Gaza, or for Nablus, for that matter, which is in the north of the West Bank, et cetera, et cetera. So our communities have become very localized by design. I always have people come through and say, why don't you have a big march like they did in the civil rights movement in the US? And I said, we can't even get 100 people in a room from different places around Palestine to let alone do something at a mass scale. And that's something that the film brought home, even if not directly by saying it, but by bringing different aspects of what's happening under occupation. I assume, especially some of the younger people here watching that, will get a broader view of their own life by seeing the stories that were told in the film. So that's one aspect. The other aspect I think is important is the diversity of voices. This wasn't only a Palestinian narrative. It was the Palestinian struggle and what we go through, but it was told through myself as a Palestinian. It was told through an Israeli voice. It was shown through an Australian person's voice, a British person's voice, and people from different sectorial backgrounds. I come from the business background. There's somebody there who's a journalist, Jonathan Cook. There's someone there who works in the legal framing of arrests, specifically children arrests. And there's an Israeli tour guide who goes through one of the demolished villages of 1948, Lifta, which, by the way, I was just sitting 2 days ago in a room at a place where a person from Lifta, who's a very big activist around Lifta, was there. So these are things that are sometimes kept in the background, but the story brought them to the surface. This is not nightly news material, but it is the reality that we live that brought us to the point where we are today. So I feel that the film was that kind of a bridge, bringing the daily reality, highlighting it to the point where while it was put together in a way to show that this is much more deeper than just what the nightly news might want to show. And lastly, I would say two things. One is Josh has created credibility by all the work that he did before this film. We have a lot of filmmakers come through. We have a lot of journalists come through. It takes me about 2.5 minutes to understand, has the person ever read an article about this issue, or are they just riding the bandwagon of a hot issue? Josh clearly not only listened first for a very long period of time by bringing all the delegations, but you feel that you're talking not only to a trusted party, but someone who honestly wants to understand the bigger picture and doesn't have blinkers on of saying, I only want to understand it through the Palestinian lens. And I got that through his delegations, and I got that through engaging with him. So that's the credibility is one very important thing. The other is that the people he spoke to, and I'll put myself in this bucket as well, are people who have dedicated their entire adult lives to this issue. So whether it's the journalist or the legal person, or I would say myself, we know this stuff. We know how to articulate what we're going through. And the lacking link is the ability to amplify those stories to the audiences that matter. So Josh came and did that through his film. You're doing this here through this webinar, which is giving the platform to be able to bring these issues to surface. It's not about me. It's not about Jonathan. It's not about Jared. It's about the issues that we're talking about. And I think he did an excellent job with his team of doing just that, using protagonists, but keeping the issue around the subject matter, which is key. Just like today, as we see these protests happening around the world, it's not about the protests, it's about Gaza. And we have to keep that focus always in mind.
Thank you, Sam. And I think you bring up that key word that many of us in the Western world might not understand, which is the fragmentation of the people. And I know for myself, from my first visit in 2012 to my last visit in 2017, I saw it in East Jerusalem in particular, which is where I have the most roots. And I just don't think we understand, never mind the fragmentation of the territory, but the roadblocks that prevent people from gathering. So thank you for raising that. And the other important message I hear from you right now is that you need to be in it for the long haul. We need to stay open and curious, and that Palestinians and some of the folks featured in the film have been in it for the long haul. And so this isn't just about Gaza, it's about an ending in occupation. So thank you for bringing both of those key messages to us. I'm going to turn it over right now to Stephen. And Stephen, I'm going to just ask you a question. Standing against the traditions of your family and your religion takes a lot of courage. And can you share some examples of the consequences for members of independent Jewish voices when they engage in Palestinian solidarity work, which in Canada is a relative minority group, but is growing? So thanks, Stephen.
Thank you, Debbie. I would begin by saying that anti-Zionism and standing up for the rights of the Palestinian people and for the liberation of Palestine and Palestinians is not against the traditions of my family and religion. That is one of the key myths of Zionism, that somehow oppression of Palestinians is a Jewish value. It is not. So I want to put it in that context. I will say that the viewpoint of independent Jewish voices is probably the viewpoint of a growing minority of Canadian Jews. And that there are, but I want to couch this by saying this is not a specifically Jewish issue that we are dealing with here. The level of awareness or willful blindness to Palestine is not a Jewish issue. It is a cross-cultural societal issue. It is something that affects us throughout the colonializing power structures of what we usually call the West. So it's a Canadian issue. It's a North American issue. It is a capitalist issue. And struggling against all of those power structures can be difficult in all of those contexts. So it's hard for any North American to stand up for Palestinian rights. And it's probably no harder for Jews than it is for other folks in this struggle. That said, it's certainly true that the establishment organizations that arrogate to themselves, that presume to say that they represent the Jewish people, do their best to make it hard for Jews to speak out on these issues. Sam spoke really effectively about the intentional fragmenting of the Palestinian community living under Israeli control. I would say that the Zionist organizations, not just Jewish Zionist organizations, because as Joshua has pointed out, Christian Zionism is a huge factor in this struggle. The Zionist organizations have done their best to fragment all kinds of dissent and disagreement. So I've been in this struggle for a little bit more than 30 years. I would say it doesn't take courage, it takes practice. I used to say that. Now that I'm watching what's going on, especially on campuses, but in other contexts, at demonstrations around the world and across Canada and throughout North America, it is beginning to take courage, physical courage, because we are beginning to see the mask slip from the colonialist machine. We are beginning to see that the struggle for the liberation of the Palestinian people is a threat to the American empire and to the colonializing West. And so the desperation with which that threat is confronted is beginning to become dangerous. We're starting to see people getting attacked by militarized police presences on university campuses in ways that those of us who are of an age to remember this, we haven't seen this kind of militarized response really since the early civil rights movement in the United States and since the anti-Vietnam War protests at around that same time. Even then, I would say that my fear is that we're seeing a police presence like we have never seen in our society. So consequences? Well, people can lose their jobs. People can certainly lose long associations and friendships. I know of people in Independent Jewish Voices who have been disinvited from community events because of their stand, not because of any specific thing that they have said, but because of their stand against the Gaza genocide. So it does have consequences. But I think I want to end my answer to this question by really stressing the consequences for most people in the Canadian and North American Jewish community for standing with Palestine and Palestinians tend to be much less dire than they are for Palestinians, for people of color, for other people in marginalized communities. And that's where we need to be putting our attention. It is to those communities that we need to be paying attention, and it is to those communities that we need to be giving our support and our encouragement. I think I'll end that part of my answer there.
I'm not sure what's happened here to the screen, but thank you, Stephen. I'm going to turn, we've used the word Christian Zionism a lot so far this morning, several times. And I know that Christian Zionism is a term that many aren't familiar with. We know that in North America, Christian Zionism are very powerful allies, Christian Zionists, pardon me, are very powerful allies for the states, for Israel, pardon me. And in the US especially, they are actually putting more pressure than the Jewish community on the US government. So Dan and Josh, I think this question, maybe we'll start with you, Josh, and then Dan as well to comment. Can you explain to us what Christian Zionism is, and why are Christian Zionists so supportive of Israel? And I know that's a whole 6-week course because I just spent some time with Dan on it, but I just think, and we are going to send out some references in that after the film today, or the webinar today. But yeah, if you could just start with what is Christian Zionism and why are they so supportive of Israel? Thanks. And maybe Josh, if you want to start, and then Dan, or vice versa, whichever.
I'll just say a little bit. It sounds like Dan is more on top of this maybe than I am. So I'll try and do some framing and then Dan fill in or correct if I make mistakes. It's possible. I think the simplest way to put it is sort of the idea that the fate, in some ways, it's like the fate of the world is tied up somehow in the Christian framework with the reestablishment of the state of Israel. Like the fate of all mankind, the fate of everything is hung up with that. So there's this linkage between the ending Christians want, in which Jesus is Lord and reigns on earth, and the creation or the recreation or the restoration of the state of Israel. Somehow those two things are linked, right? And they do this through various prophetic passages in the Old Testament, which are there, of course, and it's just a matter of what you make of them. So somewhat surprisingly, and I'll end here, is the New Testament doesn't really have much to say about the fate of God's covenant. I'm getting into some really specific language here. It doesn't really have much to say about the fate of God's covenant with Israel. That is the sort of essence of lots of names here, Old Testament, Hebrew Bible, Tanakh, is this relationship between what becomes the God of Israel and this new people and state. I mean, that's sort of the foundation of the Old Testament, or it's a major feature of it, right? And I'm going to just say Old Testament because as a Christian, that's the way I'm used to referring to it. And I don't want to say Old Testament, Hebrew Bible, Tanakh every time. So I think that's the sort of basics. These things are tied together. And so with the reemergence of the state of Israel, that was possibly the fulfillment of some prophecy. And then after that, lots of other things will happen. And eventually Jesus returns and Christians get this utopia that some would like.
I'm a big believer in history matters and that we can't understand the present without understanding history, just like we can't understand October 7th without understanding the Nakba, right? And that's one of the huge problems with sort of Western coverage of the war started on October 7th, which is utter nonsense, right? And so same with Christian Zionism. I think it's so helpful to understand a bit about the history And I think it's actually had a much larger and much more devastating impact on the whole situation in Palestine than is often realized. So I'm going to take a bit of time to explain that history. And then after that, I won't say a whole lot in this panel because others have a lot more recent experience. But Christian Zionism started, it actually preceded Jewish Zionism. It started in the 1830s when there was this Irish dude by the name of John Nelson Darby, who he was a pastor. He spent way too much time studying the Bible's end time passages when he should have been making pastoral visits. And he was preoccupied with this, and he came up with this whole end time scheme of this timeline of events that had to happen in order for Jesus to return to this earth and create God's kingdom on earth and all of that stuff. And what was absolutely fundamental for Darby was this timeline all depends on Jewish people returning to Palestine, creating a powerful Jewish state. And that started in the 1840s, and Darby and others start to spread this way of thinking about Christian faith, that so much depends on the formation of a powerful Jewish state. And this movement grows, especially among evangelicals, and especially eventually in the United States, but also among British church people. And these British Zionists start to work with Jewish Zionists. So there was a guy by the name of Hecht, the Christian Zionist, who was the only Christian who was invited to the first World Jewish Zionist Summit by Theodor Herzl, the sort of founder of Jewish Zionism. And the two of them worked together, and this Hecht introduced Herzl, the Jewish Zionist, to his Christian political contacts in Europe. And then what happened after World War I, when the Ottoman Empire, which had ruled Palestine for centuries, had sided with Germany during World War I, it was defeated. And of course, what do empires do? They carve up conquered territory. So the British got Palestine and Jordan. The French got Lebanon, Syria. There were powerful Christian Zionists, part of the British political establishment, who then, because of their Christian Zionism, said that we as a British empire must support the formation of a Jewish state. So we get Lord Balfour and the Balfour Declaration, and it becomes the policy of the British Empire to allow the formation of a Jewish Zionist state in Palestine. So without the support of these Christian Zionists, the Zionist movement would probably have had very, very little success. And Britain repeatedly protected the Zionist movement in Palestine. So in 1929, for example, 27 to 29, there was a major grassroots Palestinian uprising against the British and against the Zionists in Palestine. The British brutally suppressed that Palestinian revolt. And as part of that, they armed Jewish militia groups, trained Jewish militia groups, defeated the Palestinian leadership, exiled these leaders, which then left the Palestinian community very weak, and hobbled it in terms of being able to resist the increasing encroachment of the Zionist movement in Palestine. So at the beginnings of sort of the Zionist formation of the State of Israel, Christian Zionists played a huge, very unhelpful role. And of course, that continues now. Christian Zionism is deeply entrenched ideology in the evangelical community in the US that has huge amounts of political clout. And according to this Christian Zionism, every Christian must absolutely must support the state of Israel and its policies. And woe to any U.S. president that in any way is critical of Israel or dares to reduce U.S. military diplomatic support for Israel. I mean, and it's amazing, a number of years ago when the state of Israel removed the settlements from Gaza, some of the folks who were most critical of that, minimal movement, really, were Christian Zionists in the U.S. who said, Israel must never give up territory because God is giving Israel all of this territory and Israel must keep it. And the Palestinians are just, have to be gotten rid of, in a sense. So this Christian Zionism continues to play a hugely powerful and devastatingly unhelpful role in Palestine. So sorry for my long rant there, but I'll leave it at.
Thanks, Dan. That was helpful. One of my Palestinian Christian friends on my last visit said, somehow God's become a real estate broker, and that's never been our understanding of scripture. So I think you've explained how that has happened or been lived out. Josh, did you have anything you wanted to add before I move on to another question around that? And particularly why, I think Dan's done a nice job of saying how they become so influential in the States is the power that they bring and the money. But do you have anything you'd like to add, Josh, just to that conversation around Christian Zionism? Here in Canada, I just want to say that in North America, we need to be aware Christian Zionism, we need to understand it, because they are the ones that also control a lot of the political and the policies of all of our government here. So it's helpful to understand that. So Josh, I'll just offer you an opportunity.
Just one quick thing on contemporary politics in the US. We are hearing a lot more, and rightfully so, about the dangers of Christian nationalism in the United States. And basically, the same people, the Christian nationalists and the Christian Zionists, are the same people. And so I guess one thing I've been thinking about is, what is it that, besides the theology, what else do they like about the state of Israel? And I would say that it has, as a part of its charter, that it has built in the supremacy of one religious group. Now, it's tricky with Jewish people more than Christian people because it's not just religion, right? It's also ethnicity and stuff. But what we're seeing is, I think Christians in the United States would like the United States to favor Christians in the way Israel favors Jewish people. I think that is becoming a part of this dangerous and destructive mix that Dan was talking about.
And I think we're seeing the beginnings of that here in Canada as well, Josh. And one of the things I wanted to mention, here in Canada, we're in the midst of a beginning journey of reconciliation with First Nations people. And in my work with Palestinian solidarity and with reconciliation, I always start with the foundation of the doctrine of discovery, because that has really set the trend. So I would encourage everybody here, if you haven't watched or learned about the doctrine of discovery, to do that, because that is the foundation for all the colonization. And Israel is just a modern, Israel and the colonization of the Palestinian people is just one way of doing that. Dan, I just want to ask you, are there a couple of books that you would reference people to if they want to read a bit more about understanding the history that includes the development of Christian Zionism?
I think I'm just going to reach for that book here. Christian Zionism by Stephen Zeisser, British scholar, and he's online. He's involved in studying, exposing Christian Zionism. A great writer. So Stephen Zeisser, S-I-Z-E-R, Christian Zionism, and you can just Google his name and you'll come up with all kinds of good essays and articles. Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Dan. And for those of you who don't know Stephen, he actually paid a huge cost for his Palestinian solidarity work, in that he was removed from his responsibilities as a parish priest within the Church of England tradition. And he and Don Wagner are doing phenomenal work to try and educate and engage us in understanding Christian Zionism. The other film I wanted to mention, if you haven't seen it, is Till Kingdom Come, which was done in 2020. And Munter Isaac, that many of us have heard, does a phenomenal job of explaining what it's like to be a Palestinian Christian and the impact of Christian Zionism and the pilgrims that come to Jerusalem and Palestine. Okay, thanks so much. The next question, Sam, I want to take it back to you. One of the questions that a lot of people are asking is, how is the current Israel military assault in Gaza impacting life for Palestinians in West Bank? One of the people who sent in that question said they can't imagine it is any worse than it already was. But can you just touch on what you're seeing that might be different since October 7th? And is it different in Area A, Area B, and C, knowing what you were just saying about the fragmentation? Thanks.
Sure. If you allow me, I just have a comment on what was just said. You actually mentioned one of the things I wanted to follow up on, Till Kingdom Come as a resource, a very important documentary. Also, there's an NPR 1-hour program which talks about the history of Christian Zionism. When the chat opens up, I'll put the link. Also a very worthwhile listen. And then what Stephen was talking about in terms of the violence that we're seeing, I would like to point people to the resource from Jewish Voice for Peace. It's a document called Deadly Exchange, and it talks about the US police forces that over the last decade and a half have been training in Israel. So no wonder we're seeing the same kind of violence that we're seeing here stateside. Well, how is Gaza affecting today? Let me start by saying, 3 days ago, I had 3 journalists in front of me at my office. One from The Economist, one from The New Yorker, and one from Responsible Statecraft. And they all kind of focused on that same question about October 7th, what happened? And one of them knows me well. He said, why haven't you written anything since October 7th? Because you write frequently. And I answered by saying, if you don't understand October 6th, you have no chance in the world to understand October 7th onward. And I told him I'm about to write a book, and I'm actually really thinking of this. And the title of the book is October 6th. And in it is everything I've written for the last 30 years, as well as everyone else, right? My last 2 articles were about our internal Palestinian political situation, which is a mess. And the second was about the Saudi Arabian normalization deal that was about to happen. And I wrote, and I actually interviewed somebody very well known. His name is Sabri Gideus. And in my article, this is pre-October 7th, like for a week, he said, don't worry, Sam. I know it's bad. I know you're critiquing it. Our people will do something to change the game. No one knew what was coming. And I don't think any of us accept exactly what happened on October 7th. But again, it's not about October 7th. It's about an explosion that happened because of decades. And it happened in a way that I wish I could have controlled in a different direction. But revolution is sloppy. And those that make mistakes will be held accountable. That does not dismiss the fact that more than one thing happened on October 7th. In the morning of October 7th, there was a military occupation, just like it's been for the last 57 years. The morning when dawn came out, there was a violent breakout of the prison. As a Palestinian Ohioan from Youngstown, I can't understand why it took so long before the prisoners broke out of the prison. And then after the breakout, there were war crimes that happened, and the Palestinians did those war crimes, and they should be held accountable for them. And then after that, a war was declared on a territory that Israel controls, which doesn't make too much sense to me. So there was really 4 things happening. I can condemn one of them. I can't condemn the other 3, to be very frank with you. In terms of the fallout of all of this, it's been devastating. First, the intangible part of the fallout. Each and every person here feels at a total paralysis of helping our fellow Palestinians 45 minutes away. We can't get there. We can't send them food. We can't send them doctors. I had a big discussion about, let's bring those kids here so they can continue schooling instead of being part of this. Israel refuses to open up the borders because we have schools, we have empty apartments, we have hotels. We are not allowed to bring a person from Gaza to here. both are occupied territory. And that's not just now, that's been the case forever. So the personal toll that this is taking on us is digging into our bodies and souls every single day. And I assume that's the case with many people around the world. But when you're so close and you're part of the territory that the people being killed are from, you just have, I guess, a higher sense of need to act. The other another component that has happened is arrests. The arrests started from October 7th, the night of October 7th, and have not stopped. Arrests are not something new, and any of you who have come to my talks anytime during the last 10 years know that I have focused on the nightly raids that Israel does to our communities to arrest people out of their beds 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. The majority, if not the mass majority of them, are put away for 4 to 6 to 12 months under administrative detention, which means there's no charges. When October 6th came around, the organizations that follow this were saying this is the highest amount of administrative detainees ever since the occupation. There was like 1,200 at the time. Remember, ever since this last Israeli government was elected with these fascists in it, they accelerated all the things they did before, but they were accelerating them, and administrative detentions were one of them. October 7th happened. From then until now, about 5,000 more administrative detainees have been held. Almost as if it's, let's take as many Palestinians as possible because there's hostages now in Gaza, and we'll just use them as playing cards. So, you know, we'll arrest somebody today, tomorrow there's an exchange, we'll let them go. That way the people that we don't want to release, we can hold on to. It's a very sick game. But the arrests are not just arrests. They're coming with a vengeance this time where they're going into the homes, they're arresting children as well, they're ransacking the homes. I mean, you saw maybe some of the pictures on Facebook and so forth, that when the army leaves the home after arresting one of the people in the home is not a home anymore. It's a trash bin, ripping up walls, ripping up mattresses, ripping up couches. And another component of that, which is not reported, is theft. They are looting the houses that they are entering. And that's a microcosm of what's happening in Gaza, and I'll get to that in a second, on a very, very large scale. I sit on a board of a bank, so I follow the banking sector here. I can't talk about it today, but stories will come out of looting that is happening by the Israeli military. And luckily, ATM machines today, all here and in Canada, have small cameras in them. So you can see the soldier breaking into the ATM machine. I wish one of those pictures come out. So the issue of arrests are something we need to watch out for. People who have been arrested and served 6 months administrative detainee, doesn't know why he was arrested or she was arrested, are starting to come out now because 6 months have passed. They are first, their physical being is damaged. One friend of mine, Omar Assaf, he was, you know, we always used to judge who has bigger cheeks, and we're kind of fat people. And he came out totally shrunk, scarily shrunk. So they are coming out of disastrous conditions. Somebody told me that, you know, the issue of prisoners is a long time issue here. There's a prison culture here. A lot of people who are not politically active get arrested by the Israelis, go into prison, come out politically active. They are telling us that all of the benefits, if we can call them that the prisoner movement gained during the last 50 years, because we've been going through the Israeli prison system for the last 50 years, have been taken away by this government. From food to showers to medical services, to the point where almost every 3 or 4 days we're getting a dead prisoner, but they don't give us the body. We have to negotiate the body of the dead prisoner, just like in the regular society, where they kill somebody, they take the body, and you have to negotiate the thing to get the person out to have a proper burial. There's, before October 7th, just a footnote here, there were, I think, 154, if I'm not mistaken, bodies of dead Palestinians held by the Israelis. Our average family size is 6. So you have about 1,000 and some people waiting home, wanting revenge, only because they can't have their dead loved one back. So you can imagine with the prisoners, it becomes even more dramatic. Another component is the economy. I mean, we know, and I've written extensively about this, that Oslo institutionalized economic dependence on Israel in a very serious way. Israel is reaping the benefit of that today. They can close down, and they have, sectors par excellence. I mean, they choose a sector to close down, they can close it down. They can choose a company to close down, they have the ability to close it down. Tourism, for example, is the prime, I would say, sector in Palestine. Well, in the conditions that we're living in today, very few people are coming. Thank God churches have started to send delegations. About 3 weeks ago, I had my first delegation of churches ever since October 7th. And that's why in the beginning here, when we were chatting before we went live, I said it's very important for everyone in solidarity to come and visit. It's important for Palestinians to see people coming through, not only seeing them on campuses. And that's an important component. When I say the economic control, let me talk about banking for a second, only because that's what I know, is that today I have many loved ones in Gaza, and I'm trying to send them money. I can't. No bank here is able to send money. Branches of banks in Gaza have been totally destroyed. Buildings have been collapsed on top of the branch. ATMs, I think there's 4 ATMs still operating out of maybe 80 total. There's no way to get funds into Gaza. And even if there was a way, the liquidity, the issue of having physical coins and bills is becoming problematic. Why? And this is a pre-October 7th issue. In all of our banks, here in the West Bank and in Gaza as well, we are overflowing with Israeli shekels. Why? Our currency is Israeli shekel. We're not allowed to have our own currency, so we use the Israeli currency. Israel pays workers, Palestinians that from Gaza before October 7th and from the West Bank, in total around 200,000 workers go into Israel every day and work. They get paid in shekels. So the worker brings back to the Palestinian society shekels. And then he goes buys groceries and so forth, paying in shekels. The grocer comes to the bank to make a deposit. So we take his shekels and put it in his account. And it accumulates, it accumulates, it accumulates. What do banks do when they have too much of a foreign currency? They ring the telephone to the central bank of the owner of that currency and say, hey, we have a surplus of your currency. We're going to send you X amount so you can exchange it for dollars or whatever. Israel is the only country in the world that refuses to accept its own currency from us. So what happened? The banks are paying for bigger safes, more insurance, more guards. What happened in Gaza? Those overflowing shekels in the safe were either stolen or became under 4 or 5 floors of a rubble. Again, damage that doesn't get on the map. It doesn't compare to the human death that's happening, but it's a death by 1,000 cuts. That's one cut. The arrests are a cut. The ransacking of the house is a cut. And the more we understand the cuts, the more we understand the reality of why we are where we are today. I can actually go on, but the effect here has been tremendous. The amount of business, I work in business consulting. I always have work. I've never not had work. Even when there were past downtimes where there were wars or there were closures, or I've always had investors giving me work to study the next potential project. That has stopped. Today, everyone is so scared because this is moving here. What's happening in Gaza is moving to the West Bank. Today, a village outside of Ramallah, in addition to, I think, 4 other locations in the West Bank, were raided by Israelis in a very significant way. So this right-wing Israeli government, knowing that they're going to have to make a deal for a ceasefire sooner or later, don't want to lose the opportunity of the chaos to be able to extend what they're doing to the West Bank. And I think that's the dramatic thing that we're facing today. That's why the economic players are kind of in a holding pattern. And that's why physically, what I'm doing right now, talking to you, can be terms for me to be arrested tonight. It's that level. People are putting likes on Facebook posts and going to jail the next day. So it's a very sensitive and dangerous time. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Sam. I think it speaks to what Stephen mentioned earlier, that whatever consequences happen to us here in North America pales in comparison to what Palestinians have lived and are continuing to live, and even amplified more. So thank you so much. I have a friend who lives in East Jerusalem, and she works in Bethlehem, and she's been to work, I think she told me last week, 10 times since October 7th, because if she can get through the checkpoint, that's a gift in itself, but what it's taking her to get through the checkpoint is absolutely ridiculous. And it's 10 minutes, as you know, from Bethlehem to Jerusalem, if there were checkpoints. So
that's happening, Debbie, around all the cities. I no longer have the ability to go to Nablus to do business, which is 40 minutes drive.
We had hoped to have Daoud on from Tent of Nations, and he was going to try and rearrange a meeting, and I haven't heard back from him. So I'm going to send a message to him afterwards to make sure he's okay, because he's been encroached on more and more, his land, and he's been in a horrific 30-year fight to prove his title and ownership, his family of the land. But thank you, Sam. And I just know that here in Canada, we're doing all that we can to try and raise up the voice. I want to turn a little bit now to what can we do. We're just approaching the hour. So Josh, I'm going to start with you. And can you tell us a little bit about what you would suggest to those of us looking to visit Palestine and Israel? As Sam has said, that's one of the key things that we could do. So what do we need to keep in mind? Who do we need to book tours with? What do we need to be mindful of in terms of our visit if we're planning to come? Thanks.
Yeah, I'll just give a little bit. I think, where you stay makes a difference. So when you're in the Jerusalem area, there is East Jerusalem and hotels in East Jerusalem that are Arab owned. And of course, there's Bethlehem. Those are two of the places people usually use if they want to support Palestinians. In the north as well, instead of staying in Tiberias, you can stay in Nazareth. And is it going to be a little bit more complicated in Nazareth? Yes, because there's traffic issues there. But again, these are not random traffic issues. It's the way in which Nazareth has not been allowed to build up its infrastructure. And these are minor things worth doing in order to help local Palestinians. And then lastly, and I suppose this is just quite obvious, but don't go on a trip in which you're only seeing tourist sites and only talking about the Bible. You need to try to engage as much as you can based on the group you're bringing, right? Whoever's leading knows how much they can bring of the conflict to any particular group without turning them off, right? Because it varies. I've had people on my tours that weren't ready, really, for what they were about to see and hear. I don't regret showing that to them, but I do try and be sensitive to because I want to be effective. Ultimately, if I'm going to bring people there, I want to do something that'll be effective. So I think about that. Obviously, all the people in the film are people I use, and there are many, many, many more. There are so many people that you can visit in and around the West Bank and East Jerusalem to hear stories about what the occupation is like. Another thing I'll do, and then I'll end, is when we go from the Galilee, so I bring my groups to the Galilee, I'm mostly bringing Christians. Of course, they want to go to Galilee, and I'm going to bring them there. It's part of the way in which I get them to come at all, is to promise them to go to these holy sites. Although I will say more and more, I've found that, I won't even say more and more, ever since I started doing this, the thing, and including a significant portion of the trip, including hearing from Israelis and Palestinians and Brits and Australians about what's happening, about what the occupation is, how it functions. I find that that's the thing when they go home that they're actually talking about and caring about. Even though a lot of them went thinking they were going to go home and talk about how they walked where Jesus walked. It's not that it's inconsequential, but it's not, it ultimately for most people, it's not as consequential as the stories and the things they saw that are happening to modern day human beings. So those are just some examples of the things I try and do when I go, in order to amplify the voices of people fighting against the occupation, and then also to try and get the dollars, shekels that I'm spending, have them go to Palestinian sources as much as possible.
Thanks, Josh. And I just want to say on our first tour, my husband and I, we did it was an exposure tour through one of our colleges here in Canada. And I remember coming home and someone asking me, and I remember saying the Holy Land has become less than holy for us because of what we bore witness to. So thank you for sharing that. Josh, are you planning another tour? Is that something you can do a shameless plug here if you are?
I'm not yet. Some of the difficulties I have, I work for a Christian denomination, and I am by far their riskiest. I'm technically a missionary, not a term I use much because that term doesn't really fit what I do. And so, you know, we have insurance. And so there are just basic conditions of safety that I have to meet in order for my employer to allow me to bring groups. I was there along with my colleague Chris in late February, early March. But we're kind of, a lot of what we do is to try and be creative based on the conditions. So the movie was obviously a creative idea I had, and we're trying to think about that now. So we've been doing a lot of, been in a lot of churches or other organizations that basically want somebody with some expertise to talk to them about what the heck is going on. And that's something we can do really effectively here in the United States. And so Chris is my partner who works with me on this. We've been trying to do that because at the end of the day, the people we can be most effective, with whom we can be most effective are Americans, maybe Canadians as well. My denomination, the Reformed Church in America, is in Canada as well. So we're just trying to be creative. How can we help? How can we get word out? Podcasts, all kinds of different things. So all that to say, I don't know when we'll be back again with a group.
Well, and truly on each visit that I've been, every Palestinian will say, go home, amplify our story, and get your politicians to make decisions in support of a just peace in Palestine and Israel. So for sure, that's a key role that all of us can play in our own countries. And I just wanted to mention two groups that I've toured with separately when I've made individual tours are Breaking the Silence and Green Olive Tours. And so I just want to recommend those if you are going on your own without an organized tour. Both of those organizations offer really great, honest, factual tours as well. I'm just going to wind up with a couple of last questions for each of you. The film brings out very strong emotions in people. Anger, sadness, frustration, outrage were some of the words they used to describe the response to the stories in the film as a whole. The question most often asked by many people was, where do we go from here? How can groups and individuals in North America support and stand with Palestinians in their struggle for liberation and justice? And could each of you provide one suggestion for us to take away and act on as we leave this seminar today? And it can be simple or it can be more complex, but whoever wants to start, and then if each of you would just add your thoughts. And Sam, you've already offered one, which is come and see, come and witness, come and be with us. But others, if you, you may have some more up your sleeve as well. Thanks.
Sure. This is the most important question. We've been educating for the last 5 decades, if not 7 decades. It's time, and the students are leading the way. They're teaching us that we have been delayed in acting on our convictions. So I actually have a list that I'll just rattle off, and then you can ask me if you want. One is, I'm an old timer. Organize, organize, organize locally. And that's easier done today than ever before because the organizing bodies have come to the surface, and you'll find one in your communities. And I would add to that, organize around demonstrations for sure at the moment that we're in because of the the magnitude of what's happening, but also organize for the longer term for structured efforts, such as creating sister cities with your local council, something a very soft way to be in solidarity with Palestine, and something that will bring the pro-Israeli, pro-Zionists out of the woodwork, because that's exactly what they don't want, is to normalize Palestinians as human beings. And the other is more aggressive, such as getting states and cities and countries to divest from Israeli bonds, which is free money that Israel uses to be able to buy these US weapons to be able to bomb Gaza. So that's all under organization. And then act. And that's what you're doing already. Educate. We cannot stop educating. And as Josh accurately said just now, it's not just educating because we know more. It's educating and meeting the person at where they are. And I would start with the Jewish communities around us. They are the ones that have had their identity theft taken place, and another entity is speaking on their behalf without their consent, without their representative acknowledgement. And I think the more we educate them about the reality here, the more they understand that that's happening to them. And I wrote about this, and I can put it in the chat as well. Visit, I already said. Buy Palestine, Josh already mentioned. You can do that by buying online Palestinian products and so forth, but you can do it locally as well. I have a relationship these days with a couple in Vancouver that's trying to help us here. They're donors, they're very amazing people. And they introduced me to somebody who has a restaurant in Vancouver called Tamam. Tamam Restaurant has a solidarity environment within it, where they're giving partial meals to demonstrators. They're actually collecting money for Gaza. So you can find these kinds of outfits in your local community. Lobby like never before, which means we don't just yell from the demonstrations or send a letter or letter to the editor. Those don't work anymore. We need to still do it, but that's not enough. We need to be in the face of our politicians so they feel that there is a loss if they don't get on the right side of history. That's happening to Biden as we speak. For the first time ever, the Palestinian issue is playing a role in the presidential debate. We had never dreamt of being at this point. The takeaway on the lobbying would be recognize the state of Palestine. You no longer, any state can no longer say they honestly believe in a two-state solution if they have not recognized the state of Palestine. And that's such a convincing argument that I think it's a good place to start. And then the last thing I would say is support materially if you can. And there's different windows to support materially. I'm going to make a plug for a place that my daughter works at Harvard. She's part of the Palestine Human Rights and Health program. Anything with the word Palestine in it at Harvard today is under attack. They have a program that links health, public health, to human rights. And you can look it up. It's worthy of support. There's also established nonprofits that work in the health sector and the education sector. One that Steve Sosby has just created. He has a long time history in doing this kind of work. It's called Heal Palestine, H-E-A-L. He's already bringing injured Gazan kids to Western hospitals. And then you have something that the protest movements on the campuses have called for, and I think we should amplify it and work on it, which is getting institutes of higher education, if not others, to give full scholarships to kids from Gaza. Let's get them back on their education track. They're currently trying to study in tents like we did in 1948. We need to accelerate that so they don't have to do that for a period of time. And lastly, more closer at home, find students from Gaza in your communities. I have a friend, a dear friend, she's doing her PhD in Winnipeg, and she lost a lot of family members. And she's trying to finish her PhD. So I try to support her, and anybody who wants information about any of these, feel free to reach out to me.
Thank you, Sam. We're planning to send a follow-up email out to everyone who registered. So if you send it to me, what you've just suggested, as well as any links, and if you're okay, I'll share your email as part of that for people to respond, because that was some very concrete practical suggestions. Josh and Stephen and Dan, do you have anything to add around or amplify from what Sam has said? Or maybe something else? Stephen?
Maybe I'll just jump in and really triple underscore Sam's organize, organize, organize. The late great Pete Seeger always used to say, stick together. So we need to get together and stick together. So I would say begin by finding an organization that you can be part of and that you can work with in a coordinated, organized way. An organization whose principles align with yours and that you can wholeheartedly support. There are lots of organizations local across Canada. There are also cross-country organizations like CJPME, like Independent Jewish Voices. You don't have to be Jewish in order to work with Independent Jewish Voices. You can be a supporter and work effectively that way, but find yourself an organization. Right now, as Sam has also underscored, the way forward in many ways is being led by our young people on our campuses. They are showing us the way. Go to a campus, but first read their rules and guidelines, because they will have rules and guidelines about how to engage and how to connect. So make sure that you're there in a truly supportive and respectful way, but go. You can find ways to support. You can find money, food, supplies, whatever it is that that the young people on the campuses need. That is something that we can all help to provide. One of the key things that campus actions are pushing for is for the universities and colleges to divest from supporting the apartheid machine. So that's a very important struggle. It's really important on the university and college level. It's also important in civic, provincial, and federal politics. Our Canadian federal government supports the Israeli war machine in many ways. We need to get behind all of the efforts to stop arms trade, both sending arms to Israel and purchasing arms from Israel. I think it was Sam who mentioned the training of American law enforcement officers in Israel. Well, that has been happening with Canadian police forces as well. That's something we can all work against. So we need to be pushing our politicians. The best way to do that is through organized group activity. And we just need to find every way that we possibly can to stop supporting Israeli genocide. And one of the major ways we can do that is through boycott, divestment, and sanctions. BDS, BDS, BDS. And just I'll finally close by adding a little note of urgency. You know, for decades, Israeli anthropologist Jeff Halper has been talking about what he calls the matrix of control. That's a lot of what the film that we've watched is about. It's about the Kafkaesque structures that the Zionist entity has built to turn Palestinian life into a prison. That's a very key analytical understanding, and it's important, but we have moved beyond that, folks. We are beyond occupation. We are beyond control. It is now a case of ethnic cleansing and genocide. And it's tell me how it's okay to be killing children in the way that is happening today. It's urgent.
Thank you, Stephen. And I just want to say again, if there's some things you'd like us to include in the follow-up, just send me a quick email with some of those points and I'll build it into the follow-up. Thanks so much. I just want to mention here in the Okanagan, one of the reasons we chose to become a chapter of CJPME, and that was about just before COVID, actually in 2019, was because we realized we needed to build a national movement and that national movement needed to be based on some principles, nonviolence, but a just peace. And so that's partly why we organized, and we've been grateful for the support and the information that we get through them. Most of the calls to action, I'm just giving this as an example to other provinces, most of the calls to action that we send out are from IJV and from CJPME, because we're trying again to get focused. And this March, as some of you know, in our house, we had of Commons, we had a vote, a historic vote and discussion on Palestine. And the number of new MPs that stood up in support was phenomenal. And that was because of the organizing work that's been happening across Canada. So it is shifting, but it has to continue to shift. So thank you, Stephen.
Debbie,
I'll just add,
Debbie,
can I just add one quick thing? This applies probably in Canada, but definitely in the US. There are not that many politicians in the House and the Senate that are vocally supportive of Palestinians, but there are some.
Yeah.
I can guarantee you, I've already heard some figures being bantied about how AIPAC is going to fund very well in primaries against these folks. So we're talking about Ilhan Omar, AOC, Jamal Bowman, this group. They just happen to all be either people of color or women, almost exclusively. Except for Bernie Sanders in the Senate, right? Jewish voice there. So I don't want to see the people who have already stood up in the United States for Palestinians lose their seats. And their opponents are going to be well funded by AIPAC and others. So let's think about them even if they aren't our representatives.
Thank you, Josh. And we're getting ready for a federal election here in the next year or so. So that's exactly who we need to be standing with and for as well. And even the last two e-petitions, which come from the House, have been supported by Liberal MPs, which for us is huge because most of them have come from the New Democratic Party. So thank you for reminding us that we need to support those prophets in our House of Commons. Dan, did you have any last comment or suggestion?
Well, just a couple of things to add to the really excellent things that have been said. You know, Stephen's comment about the urgency of the current situation. I mean, in a sense, what we're seeing is the Nakba on steroids, right? And if you think of the progression of the Zionist violence through 47, 48, and now to Gaza, it's just terrifying where this could go. And so we just need to mobilize as much as we can. Just to add one thing to all the great suggestions that have been made, for me, it's really important to put my own body on the line. And as was said in the introduction, to show up at the weekly local rallies here. And I have the privilege of, I live in a city where there are these weekly local rallies. And part of the reason that's so important is that something happens to me when I'm with a bunch of other folks chanting from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. My own commitment to the struggle deepens, and to rub shoulders week after week with local Palestinians and other local folks who care about the issue. It's just a way of there's strength in numbers, and it deepens my my own commitment to all of the organizing and other work we need to be doing. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Dan. Last comments, anyone before we give our thanks and close off?
Debbie,
Yes?
could I just bring a couple of books to people's attention, which I found very enlightening? One of them is called Non-Jewish Zionism. Okay, and it was written by Regina Sharif in 1983, and it is loaded with important historical information. And the other one was one of the first books ever written on Israeli settler colonialism, called Israel, a Colonial Settler State, from 1973. He was a Jewish Marxist professor of the Middle East in France. And I'm pretty sure there were Palestinian and perhaps other Arab writers prior to this suggesting that Israel is a settler colonial project. That's all.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Can you send me those books and I'll add them to the resource sheet we're going to send out. Send it to the email that you registered at.
Yeah, okay.
Perfect.
Debbie,
I can send you, I can't send you the books, I'll send you the time.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay.
Thanks.
Debbie,
Okay, Sam?
can I just end by welcoming anyone who wants to connect to go to my blog, epalestine.ps. There's a lot of resources there, documentaries, readings, and so forth. But the top right-hand side is all my social media that my kids taught me how to use. So if you connect, I'll get back to you.
Okay, thank you, Sam. And I just want to speak for your blog. I often turn to it on a day when I'm thinking there's no hope, and I read one of your posts or your blogs, and it raises me up again. So thank you. I'm going to turn the screen over to Gabby right away, but in my tradition, we have a song, and one of the lines in the song is, how does a creature say thanks? And I just want to say that this morning, I don't know how to say thanks. It seems not adequate, but thank you for the four of you and what you've shared. And Sam, just what you're enduring, and I hope to see you in November and at the conference, but yes, for sure. So thank you. And Gabby, I'll turn it over to you now. Thank you.
Okay, well, I echo all of that, Debbie. I really want to thank Debbie for your exceptional leadership, dedication to this event, and for moderating this Zoom session. My name is Gabrielle from CJPME Okanagan, and we extend our heartfelt gratitude to the panel for their expertise and perseverance in bringing about this change. A special thank you to Terry for his tech support ensuring the smooth running of this event. In closing, I'd like to leave you with the words of Nelson Mandela: for to be free is not merely to cast off one's chains, but to live in a way that respects and enhances the freedom of others. I really want to thank each and every one of you for your presence today. Together through knowledge, unity, and action, importantly action, we will strive towards a free Palestine. We will be sending a follow-up email with a copy of the recording in the next few days. So if you didn't register yourself for this Zoom and used a shared link, please send an email to, it's up on the screen, cjpme.okanagan@cjpme.org if you'd like a copy. Also, please don't forget to check out the chat for all the ways that you can donate to IJV. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great rest of your day, and free Palestine.